Have you ever wondered why smart people make foolish mistakes, why investors lose money even when they know the risks, or why we sometimes regret decisions that felt right at the moment? The truth is, our brain is both our greatest strength and our biggest weakness. It can solve complex problems, yet it can also trick us in the most surprising ways. This is exactly what Daniel Kahneman's masterpiece, Thinking Fast and Slow, reveals. The hidden forces inside our mind that shape the way we think, decide, and live. In this summary, you will discover some of the most powerful and thought-provoking ideas from this international bestseller. And here's a fascinating fact. Kahneman is a psychologist, yet he won the Nobel Prize in economics. Why? Because his research transformed the way the world understands decision-making and human behavior. Before we dive in, let's clarify an important word you'll hear often: heuristics. It may sound complicated, but it's actually very simple. Heuristics are mental shortcuts, rules of thumb our brain uses to process information quickly. Think of them as habits of the mind that help us make fast predictions or judgments. They save us time and energy, but they can also mislead us. At the heart of this book lies one key discovery. The human brain operates in two modes. The first is fast thinking, intuitive, emotional, and automatic. It reacts instantly without effort. The second is slow thinking, deliberate, logical, and rational. It takes more time, but allows for careful decisions. The goal is not to say one system is good and the other bad, but to understand the strengths and weaknesses of both. Many of us assume that the rational, slow system is always superior, but that's not true. In daily life, the fast system is essential. It saves us energy in routine situations where deep analysis isn't needed. Imagine having to carefully think about how to brush your teeth or tie your shoes every morning. It would be exhausting. Yet, there are also moments when fast thinking leads us astray, and only the slow, reflective system can guide us to the right choice. The magic happens when both systems work together. The fast side gathers raw impressions, while the slow side refines and evaluates them. This book, and this summary, focuses on heuristics and biases, the very traps that cause our thinking to slip. Kahneman shows how these shortcuts sometimes fail, leading us to errors we don't even notice. One of the most fascinating examples is the anchoring effect. Anchoring happens when an initial number or piece of information unconsciously shapes all our later judgments. For instance, if someone asks, "Did Nelson Mandela spend more or less than 30 years in prison?" and then immediately asks, "How many years do you think he spent?" your answer will likely hover near 30. That first number anchored your mind. Sometimes anchors help us estimate better, but often they can be used against us. Take the story of Steve. He often visited pawn shops to sell old items for quick money. One day, he took a small soldier figurine, expecting just a few dollars. The shopkeeper, a cunning man, asked, "Do you think this is worth more than $25 or less?" Without much thought, Steve replied jokingly, "Of course, more than 25. The shopkeeper then asked, "So, how much do you want for it?" Unsure, Steve said, "Maybe $30. Without hesitation, the shopkeeper handed him the money. Steve walked out, pleased with his quick deal. But the next day, Steve's smile disappeared. He saw the same figurine in that very shop displayed for $200. That simple anchor of $25 had tricked him into undervaluing his item. What seemed like a harmless question turned into a clever trap. This is the power of anchoring. It can guide our judgments, but it can just as easily deceive us. the availability heuristic, and the sunk cost fallacy. Imagine this. You're sitting at home, watching the evening news, and the headline flashes. Another tragic plane crash. The footage is horrifying, repeated over and over for days. Now, if someone asked you, which is more dangerous, traveling by car or traveling by plane, what would your instinctive answer be? Most people would say plane. Why? Because those shocking images are fresh and vivid in memory. But here's the surprising truth. Car accidents are far more frequent and far deadlier than plane crashes. Yet our minds don't always work with statistics. They work with what comes easily to memory. This is the availability heuristic in action. The availability heuristic is the mental shortcut that says, if I can think of it easily, it must be important. Just like other shortcuts used by our fast thinking system, it's often useful. For instance, if someone asks you, what's the largest city in Europe? Chances are you'll quickly answer London. Not because you carefully studied the statistics, but because the name popped into your head first. And while it's not perfectly accurate, Moscow is larger, London is still very close to the correct answer. In this case, availability worked in your favor, but the same shortcut can also mislead us. Media tends to amplify rare but dramatic events like plane crashes, shark attacks, or natural disasters, while more common dangers, such as road accidents, often receive less attention. As a result, people overestimate the risks of flying and underestimate the far greater risks of driving. Steven Spielberg's movie Jaws left an entire generation terrified of sharks, even though your chance of dying in a shark attack is far lower than the chance of falling from an airplane. Yet because shark attacks are portrayed with intense drama, vivid images, and sensational headlines, they dominate our memory and distort our judgment. The availability heuristic tricks us into believing that what we see more often is what happens more often, even when reality is the opposite. Now, let's look at another trap of human decision-making, the sunk cost fallacy. This occurs when people keep investing in something useless just because they've already invested a lot in it. Rationally, they should walk away, but emotionally, they can't. They convince themselves that throwing in more money or effort will somehow justify the past. Deep down, they want to avoid regret, to protect their ego, and to avoid admitting they were wrong. But in reality, each new investment only makes the loss bigger. One of the most famous examples is known as the Concorde fallacy. In the 1960s and 70s, the British and French governments invested heavily in the Concorde, a revolutionary supersonic airplane. From the very beginning, it was clear that the Concorde would never be economically sustainable. It was too expensive, too fuel-hungry, and too impractical for commercial use. Yet, despite this knowledge, both governments continued pouring money into the project. Why? Because they had already invested so much that admitting failure felt impossible. Instead of cutting their losses, they kept going, only to sink more money into something that the world ultimately rejected. The lesson is powerful. Our minds often value past investments more than future opportunities. We cling to what we've already lost, even if it drags us further down. Just like with availability, the sunk cost fallacy reveals how our fast-thinking instincts, left unchecked, can push us into irrational decisions. The framing effect. Imagine a doctor giving you two options before surgery. In the first case, the doctor says, this procedure has a 90% survival rate. In the second case, the doctor says, this procedure carries a 10% chance of death. Both statements describe the exact same reality, yet most people will agree to the surgery when it's presented the first way and hesitate when it's presented the second way. Why? Because of framing, the subtle but powerful way in which information is presented. The framing effect is one of the most fascinating biases that influences human decision-making, and it is used masterfully by media outlets, advertisers, and even politicians. The facts don't change, but the way they are packaged dramatically alters how we perceive them. When the good side is emphasized, we feel hopeful. When the bad side is highlighted, we become fearful. Take the case of Chris, a young man who loved going to parties but was very selective about where he went. His friends found it difficult to convince him to join them, so they devised a clever trick. Whenever they wanted Chris to come along, they never mentioned the boring or disappointing experiences they had in certain clubs. Instead, they always reminded him of how much fun they had the last time, exaggerating the laughter, the music, and the energy. By framing the experience positively, they made Chris eager to join them, even though the same club had given them bad nights in the past. But perhaps the most striking use of framing is seen in the way news is delivered. Suppose a rescue mission takes place in a small town. Thousands of people are saved, but tragically, some innocent civilians lose their lives in the process. Now, the news can be framed in two very different ways. If the aim is to celebrate the rescuers, the headline might read, "Heroic mission saves over 10,000 lives." But if the aim is to criticize the operation, the story could be told like this: dozens of civilians killed in failed rescue attempt. Both statements are true. Neither lies about the facts. Yet one inspires admiration, while the other provokes outrage. This is the deceptive beauty of framing. It doesn't require inventing anything. It only requires choosing how to present what already exists. The same reality, when wrapped in different words, can completely change public opinion. News agencies, advertisers, and political strategists understand this better than anyone. They don't always lie outright. Instead, they carefully select which facts to highlight and how to deliver them so the message has the maximum emotional impact. The next time you watch the news or read a headline, remember this: what you are seeing may not be the whole truth. It is the framed truth. And the frame, not the picture itself, is often what decides how you feel about it. Optimism and Overconfidence. Imagine standing at the beginning of a brand new business venture. You're filled with excitement, convinced that success is right around the corner. You picture happy customers, rising profits, and the glory of achievement. But here's the danger. When optimism grows too strong, it becomes overconfidence. And overconfidence doesn't just make us hopeful, it blinds us to risks. We overestimate the chances of success and underestimate the possibility of failure. This is closely linked to the sunk cost fallacy we discussed earlier. Both come from the same place: unreasonable optimism. Take the case of the Concorde jet. It was sleek, luxurious, and could fly faster than the speed of sound. The designers and governments behind it were thrilled at the idea of building something revolutionary. They became so dazzled by the dream that they ignored the obvious problems: safety issues, enormous operating costs, and a very limited market. Instead of stepping back, they doubled down, investing more money into a project that was doomed from the start. Overconfidence has this exact effect. It magnifies the good, minimizes the bad, and leads us deeper into mistakes. What should have been a bold idea became a cautionary tale of how dangerous blind optimism can be. Affective forecasting. Misjudging our future emotions. One of its biggest errors is the impact bias, the tendency to overestimate how strongly and how long an event will affect us. For example, when we plan a vacation, we imagine endless joy, exploring new places, tasting new food, soaking in the sights. The anticipation is almost intoxicating. But when we finally arrive, the reality doesn't match the fantasy. The weather isn't perfect, the lines at attractions are long, the costs are higher than expected. The joy fades quicker than we thought. Psychologists even have a dramatic term for this, the Paris syndrome. It's especially common among Japanese tourists who dream of Paris as the ultimate city of beauty and romance. They expect perfection, the shining city of light. But when they actually arrive, they see crowded streets, dirty sidewalks, expensive food, and sometimes even rude encounters. The disappointment is so intense that some experience depression, anxiety, dizziness, or even physical illness. Their expectations were so inflated that reality had no chance of meeting them. Effective forecasting teaches us something humbling. We are not as good at predicting our future happiness as we think. We imagine joy that lasts forever and pain that will break us, yet in reality, our emotions fade and we adapt faster than expected. This gap between expectation and reality is one of the great reasons why disappointment follows even our happiest dreams. Immune neglect. Underestimating our inner strength. Think about the last time you dreaded something so much that you almost convinced yourself it would be unbearable. Maybe it was a medical appointment, a difficult conversation, or facing a stressful event. You imagined every possible bad outcome, and your anxiety grew worse with each thought. But then, when the moment finally came, you realized it wasn't as bad as you had feared. Why does this happen? The answer lies in something psychologists call immune neglect. Just like the body has a biological immune system to protect us from disease, the mind has a psychological immune system that helps us recover from emotional setbacks. The problem is, most of us neglect it. We forget it even exists. We assume that negative events will crush us for longer than they actually do because we underestimate our ability to adapt and bounce back. Here's a simple example. Many people are terrified of going to the dentist. The very smell of the clinic can make them anxious. Before the appointment, they imagine everything that could go wrong. What if the dentist makes a mistake? What if I get an infection? What if it hurts too much? Their mind creates a long list of worst-case scenarios, but once they actually sit in the chair and go through the procedure, they often realize the fear was far greater than the pain. Their psychological immune system had already prepared them for the stress, softening the blow when the event really happened. This is why immune neglect is so powerful. Our predictions about future suffering are often wrong because we don't give enough credit to the hidden strength inside us. Our mind knows how to protect us, even when we forget. Focalism. When one detail blinds us. Now let's move to another common error in predicting the future, focalism. This happens when people focus too heavily on one detail of an event and ignore everything else, leading to distorted judgments. For example, imagine someone deciding whether to move to California or the Midwest. Most people fixate on just one factor, the weather. They think California has sunshine and beaches, so life there must be better. Weather becomes the central detail in their mind. But in focusing only on this, they neglect other crucial aspects, the high cost of living, traffic, housing prices, or even the quality of community life. Focalism blinds us by magnifying one feature so much that it overshadows everything else. And when decisions are based on this tunnel vision, disappointment often follows. Life is always more complex than a single detail, but our minds love shortcuts, and that's where the trap lies. Conclusion. So here we are, at the end of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. We've walked through some of the book's most powerful ideas, each explained with examples that reveal just how fascinating and sometimes flawed the human mind can be. But before we close, let's take a moment to reflect on the key lessons. First, thinking is not one unified process. Our brain operates in at least two distinct modes: fast thinking and slow thinking. These two are fundamentally different in how they process information, yet together they shape every decision we make. Second, slow thinking is careful, rational, and deliberate. It takes time, weighs options, and avoids being influenced by emotions. This is the kind of thinking we use when solving a complex math problem or planning long-term goals for our future. Third, fast thinking is quick, automatic, and subconscious. It runs on heuristics, mental shortcuts that often save us time and energy. While these shortcuts aren't always correct, they work well in many everyday situations, which makes fast thinking extremely useful. But because it happens below our awareness, we rarely notice its influence, and that's why it can sometimes mislead us. Fourth, fast and slow thinking are not enemies. They often work together. The fast system gathers raw impressions, while the slow system refines and evaluates them. The harmony between the two is what allows us to navigate life effectively. Fifth, we must remember that news outlets, marketers, and influencers often exploit our fast thinking. They use biases and framing techniques to shape our decisions without us realizing it. That's why being aware of these tricks is so important. It helps us think more critically. And finally, whenever you read an article, watch the news, or even make a personal decision, pay attention not just to the content, but to the way the information is framed. The framing of a question often matters more than the facts themselves. The core message of Kahneman's book is simple, yet profound. Our mind is powerful, but it is also vulnerable to biases and illusions. By learning how fast and slow thinking work, we can protect ourselves from poor decisions, make wiser choices, and live with greater awareness. And with that, we come to the end of Thinking Fast and Slow. This book reminds us that while our mind is brilliant, it is also full of hidden biases. The real power lies in being aware of them and using that awareness to make better choices. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to know which idea from this book struck you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this audiobook summary, make sure to subscribe for more wisdom and insights from the world's greatest books. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep growing.